Now, we're on to the Vishnu and Vaughan double act, because one of the things that we wanted to do was to pair this presentation with, I suppose, a reflection on the last 29 and a bit years of Praxis's experience of understanding but also responding to the forms of vulnerability that Guy has talked about in the context of Praxis's work. And as I said, Vishnu's been helping Vaughan, and they're going to split the presentation between them. So Vishnu first, please.
Thank you so much, Danny, for that intro. Hope someone will give me a job at the end of the day. So I'll give a quick snapshot of the 30 years journey of Praxis. Since its formation, Praxis has always been a source of assistance, advice, guidance, and practical help to the newcomers to UK. 1980s was a period which witnessed major civil discontents and violence around the world. Apartheid was doing its worst in South Africa. Latin America was dominated by dictators, and Cold War was being fought in local proxy wars throughout the Third World. Politically motivated executions, disappearances, and imprisonments without trial and public flogging became regular in many countries. It was at that time Praxis was created. Praxis started off as a project of Robert Cumberly Christian Trust in 1983, and its main agenda in the initial years was to develop projects in pursuit of human rights, social justice, and equal opportunities. In the 80s, we were mainly involved with refugees from countries like Namibia, Ghana, Chile, El Salvador, and the human rights violations happening in the respective countries. In the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 and the breakup of the Soviet Union, together with a swath of conflicts, for example, in Somalia, Congo, Yugoslavia in the early 90s, led to increase in the flow of asylum seekers to UK. Absence of proper resettlement strategies started causing considerable difficulties for the newly arrived during this time. These are the daily stress of bad housing, highly unemployment, frustration in learning English, poor health, and alienation consequent upon poverty. At all the times, these problems were hidden, but in a time of recession, it all compounded. All these issues, coupled with the restrictive policies of government, forced Praxis to refocus its activities and concentrate more on problems faced by displaced people in the UK. Praxis also started advice and counseling services for refugees during this period. Introduction of new immigration acts of 93 and 96 forced us to completely shift our work from advocacy to the needs in the UK. The impact of 1993 Act was almost immediate. In 6 months prior to the Act, 13,335 asylum decisions were taken by the Home Office, 86% of which were granted either asylum or exceptional leave to remain, and 14% of which were refused. In an equivalent period following the Act, only 28% were granted asylum or ELR, and 72% of the cases were rejected. The trend continued throughout 94, signaling a hardening of attitude by Home Office officials and a determination to disseminate the message that Great Britain is not a soft touch. Although the Asylum and Immigration Act 1993 introduced quite radical changes to the several legislations with regard to asylum seekers, the government decided to introduce further restrictions in 1996. Its impact on the real lives of asylum seekers and detainees was considerable. Undoubtedly, the greatest impact has been upon the already impoverished communities who are left supporting their most vulnerable members. Things did not change the arrival of new labor. This was one of the most challenging periods of Praxis. We had to put on extra effort and commitment to respond to the problems faced by asylum seekers in the wake of Asylum and Immigration Act of 1999 and Nationality, Immigration and Asylum Act of 2002, introduced by the new labor regime. Refugees and asylum seekers started facing increasingly punitive legislation, putting many into precarious situations. New millennium also didn't bring much hope for us. But although the situation had not changed during this period, we were able to focus a lot on employment and education assistance for our clients. Unemployment is a major problem faced by all communities. The distinct disadvantages faced by migrant communities are myriad, including communication issues for those without sufficient English, lack of work record in the UK, lack of referees from the UK, lack of UK work experience, inadequate documentation for CRB checks, and sometimes, sadly, the need to work in places where they are badly exploited. Our Move On team helped considerable number of individuals during these days to enter the labor market and to secure an income and to build a new career. Coming to the present days, prior to this period, major challenge for the work of Praxis and of the charitable sector as a whole was the governmental policies. But now it's the financial crisis and austerity which is a major hurdle to conquer. Newcomers are not only vulnerable to the insecurities of homelessness, low or any income exploitation and crime, they're also a scapegoat carrying the blame for circumstances which are not their making. A major aspect for this period is the changing circumstances of our client base, from political refugees in 1980s through to some very vulnerable migrants, undocumented migrants. Homelessness is the major issue we are facing at the moment. Though we were able to work on homelessness in the initial years through projects like Somali homeless projects and single adult hosting scheme, but at the moment we are facing a standstill. In short, story of Praxis or the communities which Praxis serves and belongs to in these 30 years demonstrate peaks and troughs, periods when the opportunities for integration and settlement are greater and some when they are harder to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, as you probably realized, spending a little bit of time with Vishnu over the last few weeks, where we've been digging through boxes and finding things in cupboards and so on and looking for reports. Where was the 1998 annual review, he would say. And I say, well, we didn't write one. But what's become obvious is that we're not just telling the story of one agency, we're actually talking the story of global dynamics and the interaction of the local and the particular and very small agency that we are with those kind of global dynamics. And I guess other people in this room will recognize parts of that story where we all interacted with each other. One thing that has become clear to me is, well, initially we were thinking we could prove Guy Standing's theory right by telling the story of Praxis. In fact, it's a little bit more complicated than that. What our story is not a story about a growing precariousness, although that's a dynamic of it. In fact, we've always worked with people who live precarious lives. We've always worked with people who've come from very precarious situations. Our story is more a story about the capacity to work in solidarity with people in precarious situations. And that's a rather different story and a very interesting one. So precariousness is the constant of what we've experienced. There are other constants as well in that 30-year period which are important for us to hold on to. One is right-wing politics. You know, when we started, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. If you walk through this room now, we wouldn't have that thought about him, would we? But that's where he was seen. When we started a project on the Isle of Dogs in the early 1990s for Somali elders, it was part of the distribution of housing which provoked the election of a BNP councillor on there. Last summer, the EDL were marching into our hamlets. That's a kind of constant throughout that period. But the influence of the media, I think, has grown. And it grew in that period beyond the 1990s, really, when, in fact, it was difficult to tell who was setting the agenda, whether it was the politicians or whether it was the media. And the understanding of who the precarious are in the popular consciousness has been so very much influenced by them. But as I was looking through the work that Vishnu did, struck me there was something that was really important, and that is the importance of the law. That time and time and time again, difficult legislation that has put people in very, very precarious situations has been overturned by case law or by victories in the court. And I think that is extremely important to hold on to. I'm really strong about the notion of civil society, and the law is part of civil society. The law in a democracy is part of the means of protecting the individual against a state which overreaches itself in terms of people's rights.